You know, the more I read the news, the more I think that there must be a certain amount of confusion on this point, so I hope that this will add some clarity. 1984 wasn't supposed to be an instruction manual. Well, we have two articles in the news today that are particularly interesting that I thought were worth some commentary. The first one is here from Brendan O'Neill, who is an editor at Spiked Online. The headline reads, Silicon Valley thinks journalists shouldn't talk to Nigel Farage. When Campaign Magazine interviewed Farage, social media bigwigs went crazy. So let's take a look at the body of this article. Is anyone going to comment on the fact that Silicon Valley heavyweights are now reprimanding British magazines for their political coverage? This alarming state of affairs became apparent last week when big players at Google, Twitter, and Spotify wrote to Campaign, the UK-based global magazine that covers advertising and marketing, to chastise it for daring to carry a cover story on Nigel Farage. This article, quote, was a step in the wrong direction, end quote. The social media giants decreed in their astonishingly arrogant letter to Campaign. If you need any further proof that the tech elite has gotten rather too big for its boots, here it was. It all kicked off when Campaign released its issue that had a photo of Farage on the cover, trailing a profile interview with him inside the magazine. The profile was fairly sympathetic. Campaign acknowledged that, like the best marketing gurus, Farage, quote, knows how to get a simple message across with maximum effect, end quote. Clearly, Campaign believes that a successful politician, one whose party used social media and political messaging to good effect in the EU elections in May, is an apt subject matter for a magazine that deals in the issue of changing minds and making a splash. But some of its high-profile readers and advertisers disagreed, in incredibly intemperate tones. A group called Media for All wrote to Campaign effectively to tell it off for talking to the, quote, wrong, end quote, kind of politician, despite the fact that Farage's party won the EU elections hands down with more than 5 million votes. Media for All's missive, which was signed by the managing director of Twitter, the marketing director of Google, the head of sales at Spotify, and numerous other big-hitting media capitalists, openly said Campaign was, quote, wrong, end quote, to publish the feature on Farage. The letter caricatured Farage to a ridiculous degree. It said, quote, the playbook he and his political allies have employed is about hate, end quote. Apparently, Farage and the Brexit Party do one, quote, simple, end quote, thing. Quote, identify people who look different, mobilize anger against them, and hold them up as the people everyone else should blame, end quote. And thus, it was outrageous for Campaign to talk to him. Now, we've also read this a little bit further down. Amazingly, things got worse. Campaign's reaction to the letter was as mad as the letter itself. It completely buckled. Instead of standing up for its editorial right to speak with all sorts of people who are doing interesting things in the realms of messaging and influence, it cravenly begged for the big hitter's forgiveness. Quote, we made mistakes in our approach, and we're sorry, end quote, said the editor-in-chief Claire Beale. Worse, she promised essentially to cleanse Campaign of the culture that allowed the Farage profile to happen. Quote, we will also host a public forum where we can come together to address your responses and the issues we wish we had addressed more effectively in the piece, end quote, she said. In short, a self-flagellating crisis meeting to work out how such a terrible error, an interview with a prominent politician, could have happened. This looks like a really sad and pathetic capitulation by an editor to money men. We can surely agree that it's a bad thing when advertising forces wield such influence over a magazine's editorial output. And make no mistake, this little discussed case will definitely embolden the social media and advertising elites who think they have the right to shape political discussion itself. Now, that's an interesting story in and of its own right because it demonstrates just how far the influence of big tech has reached, to the point where now print media is in for a scolding for having covered Nigel Farage in one of their magazines. Now, regardless of what one may think of Farage or of his politics, the reality is that Spiked Magazine is correct. Farage and the Brexit Party in the UK won an election for the EU in an overwhelming fashion. And thus, they are worth talking to, especially if your focus is on influence and on marketing online. But you see, if you don't agree with the current woke policies of big tech, you're in for a certain amount of dressing down. And that leads us to the second thing that I wanted us to take a look at. Now, this is a tweet from Twitter. This is from Chad Robichaux. He writes this: "We ran a YouTube ad for our Veterans Ministry outreach for those in need, and it was denied for the word Christian. Insane. Censorship should terrify every American, conservative or liberal, Christian or Muslim. This bias is a dangerous course for America." Now, this shows the connection, I believe, between the previous article that we've looked at and this particular tweet. It's not just that big tech wants to censor political ideas that disagree with its particular worldview. I think we can see here from Chad Robichaux that big tech is also interested in gagging the voices of those who are in the religious world that disagree with them. But it is worth noting that this was a Christian group specifically that was censored. I somehow doubt that a Muslim group would have been censored in precisely the same way. And the image is perfectly clear. We see here that it reads potential policy violation. The following keywords violate Google Ads advertising policies. Please remove the unacceptable content to continue. And the content that is identified, that has been circled here in blue, says unacceptable content as keyword Christian. While Christians in the West, or in the United States particularly, may not be suffering the same sort of oppression and persecution that other Christians are suffering throughout the world, particularly in China and in other countries, there is a growing attempt to censor the speech of Christians in the West, particularly in the United States. And that should be a truly terrifying reality for all of us. And it demonstrates the absolute necessity for Christians to stand up for free speech at every possible opportunity. Because if the speech of anyone is being censored, then it is certainly going to affect Christians. But it's not just Christians who should be concerned about this. It should be anyone who values the right of voices to be heard in the public square. So whether you are Christian or Muslim, whether you are atheist or skeptic, this sort of censorship should bother you deeply. You see, folks, the reason that free speech matters so much is because free speech allows us to share the gospel in a culture that is rapidly darkening and that is in desperate need of the light of the Lord Jesus Christ. As it's written in Luke chapter 1, verse 76, the Lord Jesus Christ came to shed abroad light to those that sit in the shadow of death. And it certainly seems that the shadows of death are falling fast on the West. I am concerned about these things, not just because of the way that it affects our society generally, but moreover because of the way that it shows how big tech is reaching into the content of what's appropriate to produce. And as long as that's something that's on big tech's minds, channels like this one on YouTube and others, such as Alpha and Omega Ministries of Dr. James White, are going to be under constant threat. The content that they produce is going to be deranked. It is no longer going to show up in suggested videos. And that means that the reach of Christians, Christianity, and other voices are being stifled. And this, I think, is a good reason for Christians to take a very close interest in questions related to alt tech. I am, in fact, considering thinking through the possibility of cross-posting the videos that I'm doing here somewhere like Minds or like BitChute, simply because I'm concerned that the possibility exists that my voice will be stifled as well. I want to thank all of you so very, very much for tuning in today. God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Hey guys, thank you so much for sticking around for the end of the video. If you're appreciating the content that I'm producing here, please subscribe to the channel. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. And if you have questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section below because I'd love to interact with you. Thank you all so much for your support. God bless.